Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Nick Griffin Beyond the Pale. I'm delighted to be here with you. I doubt many of you are here with me at the moment because why on earth would you be sat inside, unless of course you're watching me on your mobile phone, why would you be sat inside in glorious weather such as we're having at the present? I'm not going to be here for too long because I'm going to cook. As you see, I'm properly dressed, including in blazer. But I'm beginning to get quite hot in here. So let's get on with it, shall we? We'll have a dive in the show in a little while and see who's in there. Have we got? Yeah, we've got people here. Lady Matriarch, good to see you. Westover 1314 and Ivan Cooper. So I know that we're alive and kicking, even though I also know that many of you will indeed be joining me later on. So whether you're with me now or later, you're all very welcome indeed. What have I got for you today? Well, all sorts of stuff. Remigration of Libyans. We've got 160,000 of them in Britain, about 100,000 living in Manchester alone. Quite remarkable. I didn't know that till I checked it. But we'll be talking about how on earth could we get rid of them. Also about the summer war. I mean, a really serious, big war, which could engulf all of us in Western Europe, and you bet your life if you're Americans, they'll try and drag you in as well. I'm not talking about Iran, where yet again we're seeing, will they sign? Will they not sign? Will they go to war? Will they not go to war? We simply don't know. But there's another war looming in the horizon, even if they put that one to bed. But first of all, I want to kick off with a subject I hadn't covered for a while, climate change alarmism. Because climate change had rather dipped out of the headlines recently, hadn't it? But of course, now it's hot. Oh, all of a sudden, oh, you know why this is? Yeah, it's all those flights that you naughty peasants take for your holidays and so on. It's heating everything up. It's killing all the polar bears. It's going to kill all of us. So we're back on with hysterical climate change nonsense. And classic examples today in The Guardian. 3 headlines, 3 separate stories in The Guardian, which especially because it's now really got online, is now positioning itself not just as the liberal voice in Britain, but in the United States, Canada, across the whole English-speaking world. So just as the Daily Mail has become the big online paper well outside Britain for the right, so has the Guardian for the left. And this ultimate internationalist left-wing paper has, as I say, 3 stories today alone in terms of climate change hysteria. This being the first one. It's the headline. 7 heat-related deaths in France, as May records are set in several countries. Extreme early summer event across Western Europe also brings highest temperatures for the month in the UK and Ireland. And yes, to be fair, it is rather hot, no doubt about it. And it's rather wonderful. In Britain, I've seen headlines saying, oh, it's the hottest May ever. I've also seen, it's the hottest May since in the last 87 years. So not quite the same. And of course, if it's hot now, it's because we've been coming up from a particularly cold period of weather which ended in about 1850. Basically, the moment that modern temperature recordings came into being was the moment when we were recovering from a mini ice age. So of course it's been getting hotter, but nothing to do with us. Anyway, this Guardian story tells us that 7 people have died in France in this extreme heat. France logged, the paper tells us breathlessly, had its hottest ever May day on Monday and again on Tuesday. And it's predicted that temperatures could reach 39 degrees centigrade in some areas. No wonder all these people are dying. But when you read the small print, it gets to this. Quote, what I can say today is that there have been 7 deaths linked directly or indirectly to the heat, says a French government spokesman talking on TV there. So, sounds fairly convincing, isn't it? 7 deaths. But then he goes on to say, 5 of them by drowning. Which, yeah, it's sort of heat related. It's hot, people get in the water. It's particularly hot outside, they get in cold water, they have a heart attack. They're sitting outside drinking Red Stripe or whatever it is. They're off their heads and they dive in the pond and they drown. But it's not, obviously the headline is designed to give the impression that people are literally keeling over because it's so hot. Our blood is boiling and we're dying. No, it's because idiots are getting into cold water when it's very hot, and actually it's very pleasant, can be, but some of them are dying. It happens. If you don't want to die in water in hot weather, don't go in the water. Then you definitely won't die as a result of the climate. And that was the first story. The second one is this. Climate crisis is accelerating antibiotic resistance across the world, the study says. And indeed, the study goes, it's quite a long article, this one. It tells us that antibiotic resistance is one of the fastest growing threats to global health. Now, as a matter of fact, that is absolutely true. It's already apparently killing up to 1 million people a year, which actually worldwide isn't that many. But because so many people use antibiotics carelessly, because doctors are incentivized to give all sorts of drugs, including antibiotics, when they're not really needed, naturally, antibiotics kill little bugs. And the little bugs are endlessly adaptable. And the more antibiotics you throw at them, the quicker they learn to be resilient to them and then resistant to them and then shrug them off and probably then eat them and be quite happy with them. So the use of antibiotics was always going to be something which would create a long-term problem. And in fact, the early pioneers of antibiotics said this stuff needs to be used, penicillin and so on, needs to be used very sparingly because the bugs that it's killing will become resistant in due course, and these drugs are saving huge numbers of lives, so we need to look after them. But anyway, the story in The Guardian goes on how a study has revealed how climate change is linked to rising antibiotic resistance in Salmonella, one of the world's most common bacterial diseases. And it says that climate change, this is a study in the Lancet Planetary Health Journal, really serious stuff this. Climate change is associated with a 10% global increase in Salmonella antibiotic resistance genes between 1940 and 1923. Now, do remember that date they're quoting. It's gone up since 1940. Yeah, remember that one because we'll come back to that in a little while. But what it says, carrying on, it does admit, it says, the main drivers of antibiotic resistance are still the misuse and overuse of antibiotics, which are used to treat infections. But the research suggested the problem is being worsened by climate change. Quote, the accumulated evidence suggests that climate change is an accelerating force behind the global spread of antimicrobial resistance, the study's authors wrote. Rising temperatures and changing rainfall patterns can influence how bacteria survive, mutate, and spread, potentially increasing the exchange of antibiotic resistance genes, they're saying. But they say it must be true because they've looked at it since 1940 and 82% of all countries had increases since 1940 in antibiotic resistance genes in Salmonella, with the strongest change in terms of resistance, which they say is climate related, to be found in the Middle East and North Africa, followed by South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So basically, Africa and South Asia, you've had a huge increase in antibiotic resistance bacteria since about 1940. Now they say this shows a clear link because also the temperatures have been going up since 1940. They do admit that there's no proof that this is cause and effect, but it certainly looks like it, doesn't it? They say finally that there's a need to consider climate change when it comes to tackling antibiotic resistance. So I thought, I know what I'll do here for you. I will ask Grok. So I typed away and asked Grok, when did the use of antibiotics become common in Africa and South Asia? Now, you might be able to guess the date, as a matter of fact, but Grok's immediate answer, well, actually thought about it for 8 seconds before giving me a long answer, but the start of the answer was the use of antibiotics became common in Africa and South Asia, primarily in the late 1940s through the 50s and 60s. Penicillin, the first major antibiotic, entered clinical use on a large scale in the mid-1940s in Western countries and spread to Africa and South Asia shortly afterwards, driven by colonial medical services, military needs, and post-war public health campaigns. So that is the reason that those countries, see, we had penicillin a little bit before that. They came along a little bit later. So now those countries are seeing the biggest increase because They started a bit later using this stuff, and it's having its long predicted effects of making bacteria resistant to its deadly potential. So that's all that's going on here. Nothing to see other than the fact it's very dangerous and people should get a grip and use antibiotics only when they really need them, not just for a common cough or cold, but nothing to do with climate change. But now here's one for the Americans, because it gets even dafter. So here's a headline also in today's Guardian. Here you go. So you may vote, or you may have thought you were voting for a president who would ship loads and loads of immigrants back home. But the Guardian has said, well, you can't be doing that because look, revealed huge climate cost of harmful emissions from US immigration flights. Trump campaign accelerating climate crisis as officials move migrants to detention jails and deport them from the USA. So staggeringly dishonest and absurd headline. They're piling lie upon lie here. The idea that our puny emissions compared to an average volcano are actually going to do anything serious. And on top of that, they're saying, but the huge increase that's going to drown all those polar bears is actually down to the Americans who voted for Trump in order to remove millions, or a few 100,000 in fact, of unwanted immigrants and send them home again. Now, in fact, of course, if you follow this logic through, someone living in the United States of America has a far bigger carbon footprint than someone living in Haiti or Colombia. So actually, if you seriously wanted to cut climate change, one of the best ways to do it will be to send every non-white back to their third world country of origin, because there they would tend to use far fewer things and create less carbon than they do living in our countries. But no, of course, that's not what the Guardian wants. The Guardian just wants to stop Trump deporting any migrants at all. The fact that he's failed to get rid of a huge number, that's for the right to worry about. But the Guardian doesn't want to get rid of him to get rid of any at all. So they're coming out with this craziness. Staggering. Let's say there's 3 examples in one day's newspaper alone, just because it's actually got rather hot outside. Now then, let me dive into the chat. What have we got? Joined by Westover. Greetings in Christ to you, sir. And Paul Telford. Hello, Paul. Great to see you. And as Ivan Cooper points out, the polar bear population has increased so much they are considered vermin. Yes, indeed they are. Although actually they're rather fine vermin, aren't they? I wouldn't want to go around killing polar bears. But there again, if one lived near me and it wanted to eat me, I wouldn't hesitate to shoot it dead. Except, of course, I don't have a gun, because here in Britain, we're not allowed a pea shooter, let alone a gun which could take down a polar bear. Anyway, we won't get into gun control today. So let me move on, shall we? What have I got for you next? Yes. So there's all sorts of lies told to us. Let me just check. I haven't got a picture up still. No, I haven't. Good. Right. I know you want to look at me rather than a picture. You're seeing how tanned I'm looking, by the way. A couple of days out in the sun, and I am getting darker. Oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes. So many lies told to us about man-made global warming, but even more by the liberal left and the capitalist right on the subject of immigration. Of course. And they told us for years. There's a sort of, it's superstitions about immigration. So for years, they've been telling us it's a great thing and nothing can possibly go wrong with them coming in. And integration, it's all going to work like magic. They don't explain how it's going to happen, but we've been asked for 40 odd years, 50 years, 60 years to believe as if by magic that immigration would work. Now, the people in the Guardian are still coming out with that, but there's a new strain of magical thinking about immigration, and that's from the people who don't like it. And just as the idea that immigration was going to work was magic, so is the idea that remigration is going to work. There's no evidence it's going to work. All the evidence tells us very much that it's not going to work. Yes, certainly, if Nigel Farage wins the next election, he will deport tens of thousands of particularly awkward and unassimilated immigrants, mainly from Muslim countries. And then he'll let in 1 million or 2 million Hindu Indians. So it's not going to stop immigration. It's not going to save our country. We will see a little bit of remigration, but it's not going to solve the immigration problem as if by magic, because magic, my friends, does not exist. Neither making immigration workable nor making it reversible, because it's a thing that's happened, and as we've spoken about on these various shows before, it ain't going to be reversed, not quickly. Now I'm going to give you one example, because this is also an example about how in the end it can and it will work. Libya and Libyans. And apparently we've got 160,000 Libyans living in Britain at this very minute. The legal ones anyway. Don't know how many more than that there may be. The majority, according to some figures, up to 100,000 in Manchester. So Manchester is now a major Libyan city. 100,000 living in Manchester. Now, let me make it clear. I don't want any of them living in Manchester or in Britain. I'm not just talking about the extended family of the Manchester Arena bombers. No, I don't want any of them here. I've got nothing against Libyans. When I went to Libya many years ago, I met some lovely Libyans, really good people, clever people, worthwhile people, very hospitable people indeed. And I'm sure that many of those living in our country are the same. Some of them are utter spongers. Guess what? We've got spongers too. Others of them are working. Fair play. But I still don't want them here. If they're working on a health service, in our health service, I would far rather that we had British nurses and British doctors in our health service, and that those Libyans went back to Libya to make their health service better. I think that stealing people, particularly health service workers from other countries, is the ultimate and possibly the most wicked form of imperialism and international capitalism there has ever been. It's far worse than taking some of their raw materials, because if you leave their clever people, they can still run their country, even if it's hemorrhaging raw materials. But you take away the clever people, especially in countries where the average IQ is about 70. That's unfair on the Libyans, actually. They're higher than that, but you know what I mean. You take away the clever ones, you take away the educated ones, and you plunge those countries into even greater disaster than they are now. But it's more than that with Libya, because Libya once boasted one of the most ambitious engineering projects in the whole of human history. It was called the Great Man-Made River Project. And when I went to Libya in 1987, I saw some of it and they explained it and they showed us what was going on. I saw some of the pipeline, and this map gives you a bit of an idea. There's Libya. It's much bigger than that in real life. And look at those pipelines, the reservoirs and the pipelines. 4 phases of pipelines. And when that was completed, that allowed Libya, it gave it one of the highest standards of living in the whole of Africa, and it was making it hugely productive as an agricultural food producer. It was producing more food than it had since Roman times, as these huge pipes of fossil water, and there was so much fossil water under the Sahara Desert that it would have been producing water for generations and allowing them to develop a massive agricultural and particularly horticultural industry. So things like tomatoes and peppers and all the rest of it, which beans that we now import from Kenya, they could have been produced there much closer to Europe. And Libyans would have had lots more jobs, and it would have been a happier, wealthier place. When I was there in 87, it was indeed a very happy and wealthy place. I'll tell you that. And I say, go away. Yeah, spoke with people. We were free to walk anywhere we wanted in Libya, and we spoke to people in the street. Now, if you're in a real vicious police state where people are terrified of speaking to foreigners, that doesn't happen. So it was a happy, decent country. And then the West got in and wrecked it. But before it did, well, this was a poster. I actually saw posters like this while I was there. This was the advertising posters under Colonel Gaddafi for the Great Man-Made River Project. And what a project it was. It was going to be tens of billions of cubic meters of fossil water transported from the Sahara to the coast. It would have made Libya completely water independent and offered the whole of the region a model for development. And it actually symbolized African sovereignty and self-reliance. And Gaddafi had built this infrastructure, funded through its oil revenue, without any loans, without any strings attached from big capitalist companies in the West. It did it all itself. And then Gaddafi, of course, was also saying, right, we've done that. So now we're going to stop relying on your banking system, if you don't mind. You know, it rips us off. We'll develop our own banking system, which will be based on what our country can produce, and we'll print our own money, and we won't belong to the global banking system, the Rothschild banking system. Call it what you will. Gaddafi said we won't belong to it. So they killed him. But NATO didn't just act as the air wing of the head-cutting jihadi psychopaths, beloved of the CIA and MI6 and the Mossad. Didn't just do that. They also, while they were at it, blew the hell out of the Great Man-Made River Project. So if they were just there to get rid of Gaddafi, they wouldn't have done that. But no, in 2011, when Cameron did his war and so on against Libya, they weren't just bombing military assets. They weren't just bombing the Libyan forces who were going to deal with the jihadi head-cutting rebels. They blew up bridges and pumping stations and aqueducts. They destroyed the whole of the key infrastructure of the Great Man-Made River Project. It completely wrecked this water network. Analysts say that the disrupted water supply to millions, naturally, made the humanitarian crisis far worse and set back Libyan, not just agriculture, set back the development of Libya by literally decades. Entire coastal populations became reliant on very expensive imported water and they tried rebuilding desalination plants and so on. And they say under foreign oversight. Actually, that's with foreign money, which means that the companies put money in and in return, they take Libyan assets. Libya ends up mortgaged to the big global corporations. So Gaddafi's ideas of regional cooperation and economic independence lie in ruins, and that sovereignty lies in ruins. And as a result, so it's not just a message, it's a message to the whole of Africa. You will not be allowed to be independent. You will not be allowed to develop your own countries. You have to rely on us. If any state in the so-called third world ever has refused to bow down to the City of London, to Paris, to Washington and Wall Street, any state which has tried to say, no, we want our reserves, we want our resources, we want the things we have for our people. Any and every African and third world country that has done that has been smashed by the militaries of the West on behalf of giant capitalism of the West. And as a result, guess what? Decades later, well, a decade plus later, Libya still has a terrible water shortage problem. So the desert creeps in. And guess what? 160,000 Libyans live in Britain. Now, some of them are psychotic jihadi head-cutting maniacs or supporters thereof who left Libya because Gaddafi ruled it and he stopped people like that. But he's long dead now. They could all have gone home. But honestly, how would you go home to a country whose water supply in a desert, if you think it's hot today, imagine it's far, far hotter than this in Libya for months on end. Would you go back there when the water supply is in ruins because David Cameron had the RAF bomb it? Of course you wouldn't. How can those poor people go home? So instead they sit in Manchester in shisha bars and so on. And sometimes they do good things. Very often they sit around and live at our expense. And some of the rest of the time, the devil makes work for idle hands. But those idle hands wouldn't be in our country. Not just if we had governments which put our people first, but if we had governments which hadn't interfered and wrecked their country. So the simple answer here is that if you want those people to go home, and I do, we can't get our country back until they get their country back. We can't set about rebuilding our country until they're able to rebuild their country, which is a problem because to do that, we've got to get rid of not just the people who want immigration, we've got to get rid of the people who run the Western banking system. We've got to get rid of the people who run the giant Western corporations as great looting arms that go into other people's countries and tear the living life out of them. So it's a big thing. But like I say, we don't get our country back until they do. And one day, if the peace in Iran comes and America is clearly seen to have lost and we head for a more multipolar world, then this day will come. This great day will come sooner than you think, when as those countries rise, because they'll be working with China and it's got a different model of foreign development, as those countries rise and ours continues to sink because we're well past it demographically apart from everything else, then it'll become more worthwhile for their people to go home. Right then, what do we do until then? Let me just before I come on to that briefly, let me just dive into the chat here and see what you thought about that. Here we go, into purged. Yep. Yes, Ivan, you're right. If Gaddafi had waited until the BRICS really came along, he might have been okay. But of course, he was, a man who wanted to do the best for his country. I don't stand at all for all these people who say, oh, Gaddafi was some kind of monster. Bullshit. No, he wasn't. He was an Arab nationalist patriot with a practical socialist tinge, and he made his country far, far better. He took one of the poorest countries of Africa and made it one of the richest countries of Africa and one of the happiest countries of Africa. He wasn't a Democrat. You can't have a democracy in a totally tribal society. It doesn't work. You have to have a strong man. The more places like Britain and America become tribal societies, the more the same will be true here as well. But it was certainly true there. Lady Matriarch really wants some strapping brothers. Yes. Yeah, indeed. Ivan knows his stuff. Libya has had slave markets back. NATO took a functioning society and flattened it, so they bought back slave markets. And of course, also, one of its, because now it can't produce tomatoes and green peppers and stuff like that, one of its most lucrative ways of earning money is to allow hundreds of thousands of sub-Saharan Africans, the ones that Gaddafi used to stop, to pour through, get across the very narrow and fairly quiet Mediterranean and end up here. So the more we interfere with their countries, the more we wreck their countries, the more we get our country wrecked in return. It's sort of karma. Obviously, there's bad actors involved as well, but there's also the karma. I'm Roger Madison. Thank you, Roger. I'm glad you found that eye-opening. Right then, what do we carry on with? Yes, just briefly for the Brits. That great day when the whole world is free is a long way away. What do we do till then? Don't pretend that remigration is going to happen. It's another piece of magical nonsense thinking. It's also an excuse not to do anything. We've got to get on with organising our communities. Now, of course, at present, a lot of people are saying, the people who still have this superstition that there's political answers to the chaos in which our part of the world now lies, are now setting their hopes on Restore. Or they were. Restore's going to sort it out. Rupert Lowe sorted it out. And now they're horrified because in the last couple of weeks, Rupert has started terminating people's membership because they're saying things they shouldn't. Although he still says he's not getting rid of some people because, it's all about free speech. My prediction is this for the Brits, that Rupert Lowe and Restore's commitment to free speech on things such as Zionist power and Jewish racist supremacism, and possibly even total remigration, its commitment to free speech will not last until halfway through next month, because the hiding that they'll take in their minds as they go into the Makerfield by-election campaign, where at present they're on 7%, easily enough to deny Nigel Farage victory, in which case Andy Burnham will win that seat. He will become Prime Minister. He will have a general election almost immediately, and we will have a Burnham Green Islamist coalition running our country for a full 5 years, because Rupert Lowe will cost Reform the seat in Makerfield and many seats likewise in the general election, if they stay on the 7% that they're on now or rise. It's not surprising they got that. They got the backing, not just of the whole counter-jihad movement in Britain, which is hugely powerful online, with vast amounts of money poured in to make it so. He's also got the backing, the very noisy backing, of the richest man in the world, one of the most powerful men in social media in the world, Elon Musk. So Mr. Lowe and Restore are really doing quite well. But it doesn't mean they're going to win the election, but they are going to cost Reform the election. But the pressure they're going to come under over the next few weeks, you will see Rupert Lowe begin to show his full colours, because Don't think that Restore is actually just a new version of the BNP, just 20 years down the line. It's basically saying there's many of the same things. It's got many of the same people. But no, it's not. Because the British National Party was a serious, genuine, radical nationalist movement with a seriously long tradition of genuine, well thought out nationalist radicalism, and that tempered with a very firm Christian base as well. It was radical Christian nationalism. Restore is nothing like that. Whatever else Rupert Lowe is, he's just another capitalist. He's just another sort of banker. He's not there for ordinary people. He's got the sound bites for ordinary people. That's all it's going to be. So people are just starting to say now, some of the people on the far right, oh, we were disappointed by reform. Now we're going to be disappointed by Restore. What do? We'll sit around for another 5 years, waiting until the right thing comes along. For God's sake, no. This search for a perfect organisation is just an excuse for doing nothing for many of these people, because there will never be a perfect organisation. Restore isn't perfect. In terms of, it's not going to be a vehicle which will come to power and remigrate all of these people with a magic wand. No. But Restore is perfect for one thing. It's a perfect recruiting ground for serious, committed, genuine ethno-nationalists to get in there. Because in your constituency, wherever you are in Britain, Restore will have 250, 300, 400, 5 good constituencies, 600 members sat there doing nothing. Because it's not a party that does anything except fight the occasional election. And if you get in there and get in touch with those people, you can use them to recruit them to build serious community organizations to make our community stronger and more resilient for the troubles that are coming down the line. There's no other party like it. There's never been another party like it. So what does it matter what Rupert Lowe says about people who shout their mouths off on social media? Don't shout your mouth off on social media. Stay below the radar and organise community patrol groups. Organise alternative community Meals on Wheels type operation. Sync local routes. There's so many things. I've written about this on Substack time and time again. The things that genuine nationalists can do to build our communities. Not in theory, but in act. I don't mean building a community of like-minded nationalists. I mean nationalists getting involved in communities with real people, doing things for and with real people. And there's never been an opportunity like Restore. So it doesn't matter what Rupert Lowe says or doesn't say about halal and kosher ritual slaughter and who should be running occupied Palestine. What difference does it make if he's a screaming Zionist? Well, no, sorry, he is a screaming Zionist. So what? It's not going to come to power. Britain's not going to make any difference there. We're a third-rate, bankrupt little shambles of a country. All that matters is how we bring our people together so we can start the long process of taking back our country and putting it right again. And not by waving an electoral magic wand, but by lots and lots of hard work. Right then, let me dive back into the chat here. That's all from directly about Britain, so especially for Americans, Canadians, etc. More for you shortly. Yes, indeed, Paul. I think so. He's jumped on the gravy train. Ivan again points out, yeah, he wants an open marketplace, not a place for people to live. Yes, that's a very sharp point. Lady Matriarch says, that's my page, local indigenous power. And Lady Matriarch's done some very interesting new work and exploration and so on that. People can do it. You can do it. If you don't know what to do, come and read what I'm writing in my What Is To Be Done series on Substack. Nick Griffin Beyond the Pale, would you believe? Right, by the way, we could do with 1 or 2 more thumbs up. There's a few more people in the room now. So Krista Street, good evening to you. Great to see you, sir. So if you haven't yet hit the thumbs up button, please do. If you have, anyway, then please share it. Right then. So I want to talk about warmongering and the fact that in the last, this is now being ramped up frighteningly. We've moved. If you watch, again, if you're a Brit, you'll know I've talked about the recruitment series to the British Army soldier following the Welsh Guards. A desperately, quite a fun, enjoyable, rose-tinted spectacles view of serving in the modern British Army to encourage more cannon fodder to go there. Well, now they've got the same for the Navy as well. They've got a series about the Royal Navy, how powerful it is, and they've got full access to the whole fleet. What, 3 ships? You know, but yeah, they want young boys and girls to sign up for the Royal Navy because they're going to expand it. They're going to die, but you've got to have lots of them. That way you've got more to die, you keep on longer. And the EU nations and the UK are now actively expanding our militaries and the defence industrial bases. Now, I believe that Britain should have an independent, effective military force. The first thing, we should have a nuclear deterrent, which is ours, not an American one. We'd do better off scrapping every single piece of American nuclear hardware which is in our country, because we cannot fire it without the Americans' permission. We'd do better simply to break them up and turn them into dirty atomic suitcase bombs, because that at least would be under our control. We could spend far less money. I believe the best defence that Britain could have would be to look like Switzerland, where every able, sane, adult man of our stock has an assault rifle in his home and is trained to use it as part of the official militia. People don't invade Switzerland, partly because it's got lots of mountains, but also because everyone's armed to the teeth. They don't go using them on their neighbours, no, but they are ready to defend their country if needs be. Do that. Train people to use drones. That's even better, probably. You don't need to spend billions upon billions upon billions of dollars on giant aircraft carriers, which will be vaporized the minute they're up against a serious peer opponent, whether it's Russia or China, or even if it gets too near Iran. But yeah, the West is going wild on rearmament. So I've got this headline from Forbes with you. Now, Forbes is a serious magazine which looks at defense, particularly sort of the in-house magazine of the great and good on defense. Forbes: Germany is rearming for war with Russia. Here's what hundreds of billions of dollars will buy. Have a think about that headline a minute. Germany is rearming for war with Russia. So you could have had that headline in 1912 or 1913 or 1914. And you would at least, if you were a German and you cheered for that, or a German ally and you cheered for that, at least you'd have the excuse that you didn't know any better because you hadn't been there before. But then, less than a generation later, you could have had the headline again in Germany, when Germany was again rearming for war with Russia. And that war particularly did not end well for Germany. You know, we won the war. We did not win the war. Russia won the war against Germany with some help from the Americans in terms of armaments and Sherman tanks, etc., and a lot of help from General Winter. But Russia and the sacrifice of the Russian people won that war. And there is if Germany, which had had decades of real poverty, which had produced tough people, which still had a large birth rate, had a far higher birth rate at the start of the First World War than Britain had, particularly amongst its middle class people, the officers and so on. And then it had 7-8 years of an extraordinarily committed nationalist government pushing it to rearm and to make the most effective military machine the world had ever seen. And if that Germany couldn't beat Russia, how the hell can the NATO rainbow waving spoilt brats who are the last Germans left, the tiny shrunken number, sadly shrunken number of young Germans who are there now, how the hell are they going to fight Russia? The Turks living in Germany might fight Russia if they were in Turkey, in a Turkish army. If it came to it, the Turks are pretty tough when they're fighting for Turkey. But if you think the Turks are going to fight and die for Germany, then I've got a bridge in London I desperately want to sell you. But that's the headline, and you can see headlines like that all over in the British press as well, the Telegraph, the Times, etc., etc. And they're all convinced that we can go to war with Russia. Not just that we can, but that we're going to. And it's actually a good idea. So I was looking through this. This Forbes article says that European NATO members, so not America, saw military spending rise sharply, a 14% increase last year to around $864 billion. $864 billion. And they tell us they haven't got enough money to rebuild our infrastructure. They haven't got enough money to actually find the causes and a cure for Alzheimer's. Now, we can't afford any of that. We can afford between us to blow $864 billion in a year on defense spending to go and fight Russia, which is also short of young men, but not as short of young men as we are. Many of the countries are now spending well above the 2% benchmark that NATO set. Germany has become Europe's largest defense spender, and it's planning to spend $162 billion by 2029 and expand its armed forces by tens of thousands of men and invest heavily in equipment, especially tanks. Germany and Holland have just announced that they're creating a German-Dutch corps to use in the Baltic states of 60,000 men, 3 whole divisions. Do you know when the last time German-Dutch military forces went into Russia? It's the Waffen-SS, with large numbers of volunteers from Holland and from the Netherlands, and from Belgium, particularly Flanders. Some of the best young men of those countries gave their lives idealistically thinking that they were stopping Bolshevism and so on and so forth. Actually, they were falling in a war against the Slavs to clear Slavic land of Slavs so that Hitler could put poor Germans there instead of taking on his giant landowners in East Germany and crushing them and using that land to settle free German farmers. That was the nationalist answer to Germany's Lebensraum problem, an internal revolution to free up land from giant absentee capitalist landlords to free peasant farmers. But Hitler took the capitalist way. He took the globalist way. Go and conquer someone else's country. And those Dutch and Flemish volunteers, Ley Underground and others, fought with incredible bravery to try to take Slavic land off Slavs. And they lost. But the Slavs lost 23 million people doing it as well. But if you think that today's Germans and Dutch and Flemings can do anything like their grandfathers or great-grandfathers did, no, absolutely not. The Russians at least can rest easy on that. But how do you think it makes the Russians feel to see Germany rearming again, when Germany nearly destroyed Russia in the First World War and nearly destroyed Russia in the Second World War, when Poland is now spending 4% of its GDP on a rapid capability force, including an aggressive force on Russia's borders. The EU as a whole bloc has got things such as Rearm Europe Readiness 2030. It's a plan. $800 billion going to be spent on that. The UK, which is outside the EU, has pledged, don't know if Starmer will actually do it, its largest to sustain defence spending since the end of the Cold War, including enhanced war-fighting readiness, new nuclear-powered submarines and army modernisation on a huge scale. At the same time, industrially, this is being done. Britain couldn't punch its way out of a paper bag with what's left of our industry, and the same is true of much of Europe. But they're producing artillery rounds at a rate that's gone up from 300,000 in 2022 to 2 million probably by the end of last year alone. And there's all sorts of, the Germans have got an act in support of ammunition production, ASAP, and places like the Rheinmetall factory, here whole new factories to produce artillery and missiles and explosives to fight a war. And it goes on and on and on. And it's just like happened between the Anglo powers and particularly Britain and the Germans and the French in the naval arms race before the First World War, when Britain had a dreadnought program building giant ships, and Germany did as well, and the French did. And the more each side did it, the more frightened the other side became of being left behind. And it just snowballed until the First World War. And that is where we are now. We're hugely close to it. And to make matters worse, in the last few days, it's got much worse in the last few days. You've seen a state funeral for this man, Andrei Melnik, who was one of the leaders of the Organization of Ukrainian Unity, which was a political stroke, militia stroke, psychopathic ethnic cleansing force, which existed in the Ukraine, particularly during the Second World War. And Melnik wasn't the worst. Stepan Bandera led an even more extreme faction of the organization of Ukrainian nationalists. But Melnik was one of its key leaders. And his organization went on to massacre hundreds of thousands of Jews and hundreds of thousands of Poles and hundreds of thousands of Russians, all of them unarmed civilians. The massacres that the Ukrainians carried out against the Poles were so utterly bestial that the SS were horrified by what they saw and insisted that it stop. It was an incredible time. And this man, his remains, he died in exile in Canada, and his remains, along with those of his wife, were repatriated to Kiev with the full support of the Canadian government, i.e. of NATO forces, just the other day. And we had this state funeral. Have a quick look. Let me just get rid of the picture of Melnik himself. Yep, there you go. So you saw that at the end. Zelensky, the Jewish Zelensky, was there honoring a vicious Nazi collaborator, because the Nazi collaborator and his men killed large numbers of Russian civilians in what is now eastern Ukraine, just as they killed tens of thousands of Polish civilians in western Ukraine, and tens of thousands of Jews, probably hundreds of thousands of Jews, in fact, in all of Ukraine. These people were psychotic monsters, and the whole of NATO is along there and is clapping and cheering as Zelensky and this disgusting, despicable Zionist, liberal, Nazi coalition government, which he sits at the head of, they're there virtually worshipping, certainly here are worshipping, one of these monsters from the darkest of Europe's recent past. And Russia looks at this and thinks, well, they don't think what's going on here. They know what's going on here. They can see this is going to be another invasion. Are they going to wait? They waited in the First World War. They waited in the Second World War. Are they going to wait for another invasion? What they do, they're pretty damn stupid. And I don't believe the Russians are stupid at all. Why should they wait? And Russia has now said that decision-making centers in Kiev and elsewhere in the West, if necessary, are legitimate targets. So Russia may well decide not to wait, to be steadily downgraded, degraded by the missiles, Western missiles, British missiles included, American missiles too, although Europe buys them now from America, that these missiles are steadily hitting Russian oil depots. They're hitting Russian anti-aircraft positions. They're hitting Russian radar installations. They're beginning to downgrade Russia's ability to fight a war and to resist a rapid NATO attack. So how long should Russia sit there, having its capabilities slowly degraded, piecemeal, before they say, no, that's enough, bang. The longer they do, the worse it gets. Why should they wait? Germany at present is a demilitarized shambles, and its industries are not capable of making many shells and drones. Why should Russia wait 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years for Germany to catch up, to make up for the decades of liberal refusal to spend any money on their armed forces at all? Why should Russia wait? Well, I tell you, Russia's not going to wait. It wouldn't be right for Russia to wait, as a matter of fact, but also because things got much worse this week. 4 days ago, in the city of Starobelsk, this building was hit, and 60 people were injured and 21 people were killed. And these people were not Russian military planners. It wasn't a Russian drone factory or a drone control place. This was a teacher training college. And 17 of the 19 people killed in that Ukrainian attack with armed missiles were girls aged 19 and 20. They were first year teacher training students. It wasn't just one mistaken hit. The Ukrainians hit the place and the places around it in Starobelsk with a barrage of missiles to start with, and waited until the survivors had come out and were in the open and even more vulnerable, and then hit them again. Then they waited a little bit longer for the rescue services to come, and then they hit it again. It was a massacre carried out against the Russians with weapons and intelligence supplied by people like our government. And now that Russia has said, right, that's it, now we are going to react. And Russia is yesterday, and has reiterated it today, have said to the diplomatic corps of the United States and the United Kingdom and all the European Union countries, get out of Kiev, because we're about to hit it with ballistic missiles on a major scale. And we're going to punish the people who've done this in order to make them understand that we can fight a war. But if you're going to fight a war with us, do not break the Geneva Convention by attacking teacher training schools. You know, if you kill our soldiers, we'll try and kill your soldiers, fair enough. But don't attack colleges where teenage girls and young women in the age 20 are sleeping peacefully in between learning how to teach primary school kids. Don't do that, because if you do, we're going to flatten all your command centers. We're going to really hammer you. And that's what Russia has said they're going to do. So they're going to do it. And Britain and America and NATO and the European Union countries have said, no, we're not taking our people out. We're leaving them there. So you might wake up tomorrow morning and find that your ambassador and his whole staff are dead in an embassy in Kiev. And that we're at war. Because it's a highly likely thing to happen. If that were to happen, the escalation could be very rapid indeed. The only chance of avoiding this escalation, actually, is if Russia hits the West so hard and so fast and gives our political elite such a bloody nose that they realise that this is not a contest they can win. Therefore, they stay out of it. It's not our war. It's somebody else's war a very long way away. The only way this is Britain's war at all in Ukraine is that Boris Johnson kept it going in 2022 and thereby has the blood of at least 1 million good young men on his grubby, podgy, women molesting hands. If you ever meet that man in the post-Holocaust Britain and he's still alive, well, you know exactly what has to be done, don't you? Because he'll be responsible for the deaths of millions upon millions upon millions of us, of our people, of your loved ones, because he would have been the one who turned a border quarrel started by Ms. Newland and the American neocons with their illegal coup. Started by them, this border quarrel is snowballed and could indeed it could really make this summer hot. We're that close to it. Even as possibly in Iran we reach some sort of peace deal, we got this one about to blow up instead. Utter bloody madness. Anyway, let me dive back in and have a chat here. Yeah, you're right, Ivan. The elites have lost this sense of fear. Thinking themselves wise, they became fools. Absolutely so. Yeah, that is correct. I speculated on Substack some months ago, actually, now that the problem here is that old men with power have an instinct to go to war because their instincts develop in the times when we lived in little hunter-gatherer tribes. And if the chief of the tribe, the old man, takes the tribe to war, either the tribe wins and he gets sex slaves and pushes his genes onward through the generations, or the tribe loses and he gets young widows and does the same thing. So I fear that old men with power actually have a tendency to love war. Now, Putin hasn't, because he grew up in the very aftermath of the Second World War, and the Russians, and for that matter, the Germans up until now, both those nations, the Russians and the Germans, had an absolute bellyful of war and didn't want it again. But the politicians they've got now, these females who have no concept of what it involves, and feminized men who have no concept of what it involves, they think we can have a war. Yeah, why not? What could go wrong in a war? lots of things can go wrong in a war. I'll tell you that. John Kapasaki, good to see you here, John. Yes, if they can't define a woman, I'd hate to see them try and define a man. They couldn't define the day of the week, could they? Desperate people, I'm afraid, but it's dangerous for us. Right then, so that was the tragedy in Starobelsk, which I've told you about. And what have we got? That's it, really. Time's up. Next week, I'm not at all sure I will be with you, because I will be over in Northern Ireland helping out with the Temple Uniting ceremony and visit. So if I'm with you, I'll be with you, but if not, that'll be why not, and I'll join you the following week instead. I'm going to leave you with an end slate, which is rather topical because it's Johnny I Hardly Knew, which is a song at least 250 years old, which was repurposed even more as anti-conscription song in the First World War in Ireland, and became very popular. It was revived with the 60s folk revival. The Dubliners did a great version. Tommy Mackham, the Clancy Brothers, the Dropkick Murphys, if you're an American, and Joan Baez also did a really good version of this song, which is the one that I've got for you. So let me just find where we got this on the stream here, waiting to go. Yep, I've got it. So this is Joan Baez's version of Johnny I Hardly Knew You, a reminder that wars may look very glorious from a distance, but they're really not. They're better avoided. If your country gets invaded, go to war. If your government tries to take away your freedoms and swamp you with foreign people and throw you in prison if you object, at a certain point, you will have to go to war. Those wars are justified. But a war thousands of miles away, in a quarrel about which we've been lied and lied and lied to, no, absolutely not. So I'll leave you with that, and a reminder that freedom is never free, because the tree of liberty must be watered from time to time with the blood of martyrs and of tyrants. Deus Vult.
So this song I used to sing years and years ago, and it's suddenly become very appropriate again. With your drums and guns and guns and drums, hooroo, hooroo. With your guns and drums and drums and guns, hooroo, hooroo. With your guns and drums and drums and guns, the enemy nearly slew you. My darling dear, you look so queer. Johnny, I hardly knew you. Your legs that used to run, hooroo, hooroo. Where are your legs that used to run, hooroo, hooroo? Where are your legs that used to run before you left to carry a gun? I fear your dancing days are done. Johnny, I hardly knew you. Your eyes that were so mild, hooroo, hooroo. Where are your eyes that were so mild, hooroo, hooroo? Where are your eyes that were so mild when my heart you did beguile? And why did you run from me and the child? Johnny, I hardly knew you. An arm, you haven't a leg, hooroo, hooroo. You haven't an arm, you haven't a leg, hooroo, hooroo. You haven't an arm, you haven't a leg. You're an eyeless, boneless, chickenless egg, and you'll have to be put with a bowl to beg. Johnny, I hardly knew you. Again, hooroo, hooroo. They're rolling out the guns again, hooroo, hooroo. They're rolling out the guns again, but they won't take back our sons again. No, they'll never take back our sons again. Johnny, I'm swearing to you.